National Flood Insurance Program Zoning Compliance Review. As you guys may recall, we received this document just to George. Since, I guess, April was when we received the first draft of the floodplain map update. That has now moved to the point where that first draft has now been superseded by a second draft. The initial draft has been discarded. They're now, the folks who are doing this, Office of Energy and Planning, FEMA's involved. They're now working to the points of finalizing those maps. And they've notified us, they notified us prior to the last meeting that process we would be notified of how they're going to finalize it. As part of that program update, the folks at OEP, specifically Christopher Northrup, he did a legal compliance review of our zoning to make sure that our floodplain zoning ordinance was legally compliant with what it would need to be in order to qualify for the National Flood Insurance Program. And he politely sent us this back in November. Now, since November, I've been playing phone tag, trying to have a decent conversation with this guy. The reason why I feel this is important is we needed to have real definitive answers about these changes. I personally don't feel comfortable taking somebody else's changes to our zoning and putting them for the voters before we have a serious discussion with him. And I didn't want to put it before Laura Spector until we had a serious discussion with him about why these changes were made. You know, even if it was just me discussing it with him to try to get a sense of this. I understand the best intent here is to keep us legally compliant. Pretty simple. But, you know, the problem that we face here, and George and I discovered this after the last meeting, is that to get this moving forward, to get it to the voters, because this would have to go to the voters in March to amend the zoning ordinance, to keep the floodplain zoning ordinance in compliance, we would have to post this in the paper tomorrow morning. Have this, send and deliver. No, we haven't had a chance to seriously review the document. I've tried to connect with a guy and have a discussion, and it hasn't worked out. It hasn't been reviewed by the town council. The board hasn't even discussed it. We're going on good faith that this guy knows what he's talking about.
No.
And
you know?
No, don't do it.
No, and I'm sorry, I'll get you into this. I know we had a 100-year flood, was it 2 or 3 years ago? And those folks down there didn't get flooded.
We had them back to back.
Did we? Okay, please go ahead.
First off, I know Chris through email and through PlanLink. Very knowledgeable person.
Okay.
The best way to correspond with him again is through email.
Okay.
That would be the best way to talk to him. What are the major changes that he recommended making?
It goes on. He takes our Article 9 and goes through and crosses out certain items and replaces them, such as right on the first page, Article 9A7 is deleted. And then it goes on, and what it used to say, or what he's suggesting we remove, is number 7, FHBM, which is the Flood Hazard Boundary Map. It's an official map of the community published by the FEMA that delineates and approximates boundaries of the floodplain. An FHBM is generally the initial map provided to a community and is eventually superseded by the flood insurance rate map. Now, a lot of this is changes like that.
If I'm not mistaken, the floodplain map was actually produced by SRPC. The language for this was originally done through SRPC. Without knowing what the federal guidelines are for FEMA and the flood map zone to keep the flood insurance valid, you're probably going to have to run that by Laura Spector.
I think it's definitely got to go by Laura, because if it ends up going to the people, it has to go to her anyway to be reviewed. But what we discussed in the last meeting is I didn't want to send this to her.
And where does it say that we're losing our flood insurance?
It doesn't. But there's the implicit thought that if we're not compliant with our zoning ordinance, that there could be a denial of benefits based on that. I'm sorry, he was first. Yes.
If there's a simple, I guess one of the questions I would suggest you ask
there a simple place where we can say, our flood, our flood stuff is governed by their regulations, right? Just like with the definition of farming and agriculture, we just said, okay, we're just going to take the state definition. It's whatever it is in RSA 2034A. Is there something we can do? But I'm not asking you to answer the question, but one of the questions we've been asking is, hey, if assuming we decide that we want to conform our zoning to their rules, is there a place where we can just refer to what those rules are? And so as they update them, we don't have to go through this process again in the future.
Yeah.
Now, we can also decide we don't want to conform our zoning to what they're saying, because we don't trust them. But if we decide that we want to conform, is there a way that we can make it so we don't have this housekeeping every 2 or 3 years?
I think that's a noble aim. I don't know what the origin of I wasn't around when the floodplain ordinance came about, so I don't know if it was one of like the small wind energy we dealt with a few years ago, that was a model ordinance from the state. Was anybody around when this came up?
Yes.
Okay.
The flood, it's not that old, actually. We just had it signed off by the state.
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yep.
We've had-
That was submitted, it was done, we had to have it submitted to the state in order to qualify and keep the floodplain, or keep the flood insurance going.
Right.
And it had to be signed off on. If I'm not mistaken, there's a signed copy from the state somewhere on that accepting ours.
I don't doubt that. I'm sure there
So,
is.
at this point, because there's no way you're gonna get the answers you need to have it posted by tomorrow and make an informed decision in a couple of weeks when you hold the next public hearing on this, to put it in front of the voters. And I'm not even sure that had to go in front of the voters. I think that the board just voted on it.
It is. It's an amendment to the zoning. So it has to go to voters.
It's okay, then it went to the, okay. But I don't think we're in jeopardy of losing our flood insurance, because I do remember that we had to submit that to the state. They had to accept it. And somewhere in the files, there should be a signed copy of them accepting it.
Laura will know.
I'm sorry, Ed had his hand up first. Go ahead, Ed.
The town of Brookfield has had zoning wording for quite a few years, but in a slip of paperwork or something, it never got signed into law. So the Mother's Day flood, which was 4 years ago now, or better, we had a 100-year flood, and there was no problems. Then the next year we had what they called a 50-year flood, and there was still no problems. Yep. I'm just giving you a little history on where this goes. There was one person down there along the river that tried to get some flood insurance, and so that opened the can of worms. And through a surveyor, a licensed surveyor, and all that, come to the conclusion that there was no damage to the house. They wanted to get damage to their yard on another flood, we had actually 100-year and 2 50-year floods. And there's no base elevation mark for that river. The one flood zone we have that we drew, so it went nowhere. And the federal and state agencies said, well, we can't do nothing unless there's a base flood elevation, and you don't have one, and you can't seem to get one, and if nothing's happened, it's just typical bureaucracy. I'm saying all that because, in answer to Rob, I don't think there's anything we can do like that, because they produce the maps.
And they change them.
And they change it, but we do the wording as to whether we allow people to build in those maps. So it's not meshed together like some of our other ones where we could just say, okay, what they say will go, and when they change, the change will be made. Every time they make a change, it may affect what we have in our ordinances.
If memory serves, when we looked at the draft maps back in April, when they showed up, I remember scratching my head because there was really no change.
No, there was
to
absolutely
the
nothing.
base flood elevation area, and there was some designation on there that it hadn't been determined. Like there was some sort of
It's a
designation saying
base
that
flood elevation, I think is what
right,
it's
they
called.
hadn't determined exactly where the 100-year flood mark was, yet it was still there, and the whole thing seemed a little bit
Hokey pokey.
circular.
We took some satellite pictures that day, and that's what we were gonna base it on.
So at this point, I think that we do need to study this a little bit further and definitely talk to Chris, the person who did the editing, before we, but, yeah, all the plan link stuff, which I don't read, so. Could be. Rob?
If you wanted to, you want to cover your bases by posting, is if you wanted to accept this tomorrow, and in 2 weeks or whatever, decide whether or not we'll actually want to have that public hearing. Right, you keep your options open by posting.
Right.
I know it costs some time and money.
But the problem is that we would have to post it as is.
Right. At worst case, we decide that we want to change it after that, and then post it again, right, have another hearing, right, after that.
Does it have to be in the paper tomorrow?
Well, no, we'd have to submit it to the paper tomorrow. That's correct, George?
Okay,
It has to be in by Friday.
okay.
And
So you have
so we
till
have a couple of
Friday.
days. Yeah, it has to, we'd have to make the decision tonight, and then George would have to act tomorrow to make sure that it's in
If
the
we
paper.
post it, does it lock us into anything?
Holding a public hearing.
It's not all that much to be locked into.
Okay, well, I don't,
Why do you think you're gonna get a response in the next 2 weeks from the attorney? If you've been trying to pass whatever.
Well, no, it's not the attorney, it's the person who,
That person. You've been trying to, why have you been successful over the last 2 weeks?
just gonna have to keep trying, just gonna have to keep trying. You know,
Point.
so, yeah.
What's it cost?
I'm not inclined to post it. I don't feel that we have enough information on this. I don't think that the folks who are down there are in imminent danger of losing their flood insurance if they
No.
don't have it.
I don't even know if they have any. We have
I mean,
four-
we've had a 100-year flood, 2 50-year floods, and they weren't affected.
You have 4 houses down there,
Yeah.
4 properties.
Mhm.
Do any of them have flood insurance? I doubt it.
Chances are, if they don't, if there's a flood and they don't, we'll hear about it.
The only thing that's going to flood is if the dam breaks on Kingswood Lake.
That won't even do anything. That'll get absorbed by the swamps,
All right.
marsh.
Okay. So,
Sorry to hear that.
okay. So I'm not going to move forward with this. I'm going to continue trying to. I'm not going to post this for a hearing. So if anybody disagrees with that, that'll be good. Okay. Item 8, new business. Does anybody have new business they want to bring up? Nope. Okay. Moving on. Member comments. Item 9. Yes. Eddie.
I just by chance caught wind that Wakefield is, their planning board is going round and round with their definition of agriculture. And they have, from what I understand, there is a gentleman on the planning board that came from Stratford. Might I get this right? And he's, I don't think it's going well.
You mean SRPC?
No, well, I don't know, I think he's from the town of Stratford.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But he is telling people that, you know, I don't know, I got it secondhand, but it just alerted me. I thought this planning board ought to know in case anybody's interested. They should go over, maybe voice their opinion, that they're trying to tear it all apart and do away with it.
With what?
The agricultural zoning and the definitions of, and what you can and cannot do in Wakefield. In Wakefield.
What was
What do they wanna make it, all residential?
Why don't they just call us and we can give them recommendations?
I said, you know, you might want to contact the Brookfield Planning Board. So they were all about ready to accept it, pretty much like we did with the state definition, and added some of their own stuff. And this guy got up and he just started rambling on, from what I understand. Did you go to the meeting?
No, but I know people that.
And said that by the end of his ramblings, he had people questioning what to do, and they've tabled it at this point.
Marching the torches in the street.
So,
Any other?
just thought the board members ought to know.
Always interesting to hear what's going on.
I'll have
Okay,
to-
Any
I'll
other
have to
member
check with
comments?
my contacts
There
on
you
the
go.
board.
You're innards.
Okay, hearing none. Meeting is adjourned. Date of our next meeting is February
Next month.
Goodness gracious, so how?
He's working on it.
It'll make it
He's
so
working
much-
on it.
Is that where you guys were? How'd it go? Sell some,
Sell my phone, I'm not letting you guys get off easy.
February 13th.
You're gonna deal with this.